We're live again. Well, today I'm here with Ellene Sana. I'm really happy to have you. It's been a long time that I tried to get you on the podcast. You are the executive director of the Center for Migrant Advocacy, CMA, and you do a lot of great work for migrants' rights. I think one of the special focal points of your work is on the Gulf states, because it's obviously where a lot of Filipino migrants are headed. So you've been very well. You've been at the forefront of migrants' rights, and it's great to have you here today. You also have a very interesting history. I was just reading through your biography here a little bit. You were actually very active as a human rights activists, not only in the context of migrant rights, but also, struggling for democracy in Timor-Leste, South Africa, Burma, so many different places actually. So not only will it focus on the Philippines, and that would be my first question. And you have a civil engineering background, right? I mean, this is very interesting. So what about all this mix? Like what where did you start, and how did you get to be a migrants' rights advocate?
Okay. First, and let me say that I'm a licensed civil engineer, but then I sort of had my political awakening, as you would say, from the University of the Philippines, and that was the time. That was 1970s, 1978, when you had the resurgence of student activism, and I was an idealist. And I got interested in the issues, social issues, of course, the social issues in the country. But it was very interesting also that you have similar struggles across the seas, the struggle in South Africa against apartheid, the struggle of the Palestinian people. And somehow I got involved into these issues. Yeah, apart from my activities as a student in the university. Yeah, so when I left the school, I continued my work. Being a solidarity activist, I got more involved in the issue of Timor-Leste, struggling to be free from the occupation of Indonesia. And at that time, apartheid was already out. Of course, they have a new government. And then basically I got also interested in monitoring the developments in Latin America, in Central America, where there was a time in the 1980s when there seems to be new democracies being put in place. But of course, later on, it wasn't that way, apparently also. Yeah, so it just happened that way.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I was involved with solidarity work for many years, and then I started getting interested and involved as well on the issues of Filipino migrants. It was quite interesting because when we were doing the campaign to support the right to self-determination of East Timor, for example, we would be seen by the Indonesian embassy whenever we would hold rallies there as the enemy. But then interestingly, when I got more and more involved on issues of migrant workers, then I'm a friend of the Indonesian government. Yeah, so that's an interesting thing. In the case of Burma, it was the same. You shouldn't be doing solidarity because what have you got to offer to our people? You're just as poor and as miserable as us. But then said, well, I may not have the cash to extend to the people of Burma. But then I think we share ideas on how to be governed. It cannot be just the military junta, you have to ask the people. And we had our share of all these struggles, trying to have our voices heard and not just be dictated upon by the powers that be. So there was a time when you mix your issues of the migrants crossing the borders. And interestingly, going to places that you fought, you try to assist somehow through solidarity activities so they can decide their own fate. But then at the same time, you would also have instances of many other countries who would shut their doors to migrant workers, and that is something like uh, unacceptable. Like, how can you be shutting the doors to migrant workers when you know very well what it was like to be deprived of liberties, to be persecuted, to be vulnerable. And to me, it became really a challenge. And yeah, at the present time, for example, I've been trying to reflect on this, why states would behave that way. And maybe it's because for the longest time we have this history of colonialism and occupation and dividing the world into states and trying to mark your own state against the invaders. And the purpose of in those times would be like invasion, trying to rule over these smaller states or weaker states. But then my thinking is, with all of this contemporary labor migration, the issue is not invasion, definitely not occupation by all these armless people, armed without arms, but because there is a need to fill in those countries, at the same time that they have needs that our state is not able to provide. And so we can coexist harmoniously, but then apparently that's not the way states look at the present movement of people crossing borders. So they're still pretty much in that mode that we have to secure our borders for ourselves, for our people, more than anything else, which is quite challenging for us because in these times when, there is tension all the time. You have the U.S.-Iran tension, which a lot of the people in government in the Philippines imagine will break out into a war. I'm of the opinion that maybe it will not break out into a full-scale war, especially because the world has changed so much. It's not anymore like one country winning, but it's probably the annihilation of the whole planet that we're talking about. So these are issues that I hope the states would reckon with and try to disabuse their minds that, their mindset has been from that time when you have to secure the borders, when the whole issue is about national security. Yeah, so I think in these times, that is not, that is something that they have to change and rethink very seriously.
Yes, very.
Yeah.
I mean, like, okay, so it's a very interesting, it's a very interesting observation, or a couple of observations you made there. Right? So let me just backtrack maybe for a sec. So from the get-go, it was really that you had a very international kind of outlook, right? So you were not only focused in your advocacy on the Philippines, right? So did you travel to all those countries? So how did your life look like in the 80s?
It wasn't like, when you are engaged in when you are involved or concerned with the struggles of other people, it doesn't mean you have to go there. Of course, on many, many occasions, you do your share of solidarity, expression of solidarity, right here where we are in the Philippines, for example. So I've had my share of expressions of solidarity with the Palestinian people, with the people of South Africa. And I do not have to be there.
Right.
Yeah, but although there was a time I was privileged to be able to visit Southern Africa, but at that time when I made the visit, we were still not allowed to go to South Africa in protest of the apartheid. So we just had to we had to meet the people, the anti-apartheid activists outside South Africa, so in Zimbabwe and in the newly democratically elected Namibia. Yeah, so, but yeah, it was quite interesting. And that would be like one, now that I am into migrants' rights, at the time when we had this policy of not allowing to travel, for Filipinos not to travel to South Africa. I think there is wisdom to that. It's a political statement of the whole state, with the people in it, that we do not want to go there because in protest of apartheid. So, but of course, it doesn't mean that we're severing our ties with the South African people at the time. So it was quite interesting. Yeah.
Okay, and then CMA, how did the Center for Migrant Advocacy come about?
Well, CMA was quite younger than we are, or like when I say we, together with other colleagues, we were originally like 4 in CMA. We were older than the CMA. So CMA was like December 2002 when we decided, we came together, and then we asked our friends from overseas as well if there is a space in the Philippines for another civil society like CMA to address the many concerns of migrant workers. And 2002, we started this migration from the 70s, and while all presidents asserted that it wasn't a way to promote growth and all that, the numbers will belie that, because the numbers keep on increasing. Whether you have wars somewhere out there, especially in the Gulf states, the number of our migrant workers is just on the rise. So for sure there's a lot of issues and concerns that we need to address, and government may not be able to do that. So, but then we still went through that process of consulting and asking particularly colleagues from overseas, from migrants' rights and human rights fields, whether we can have a CMA. If there's a space for CMA in the Philippines. And of course, the answer was in the affirmative. So we have had a series of workshops, because scanning the environment as well. Who are the groups that are already existing? What are they doing for the migrants? And a lot of them are providing direct services.
Meaning?
So meaning if you need to if you need to do medical, if you have issues with legal, So, but for advocacy work, there isn't much. I mean, while it would be a part of the raison d'etre, for many, but those who are really engaging with direct policy advocacy, there were not that many. And so, so CMA would be one of the few who would engage with the policymakers, but executive and the legislative, on the issue, on the policies that should be put in place to guarantee protection for everybody, not only for a few. So that's how we came to be, and we celebrated our 15th year with a book. So chronicling our journey. It was not a walk in the park for sure. We had to struggle with resources, and the work was just enormous. And especially with advocacy, you can be stuck in your issue for many years, and until you will ask yourself, is this worthwhile to pursue anymore, because you're not seeing any results. But then I guess that's part of the work that you have to do. One learning we realize is, in advocacy, it could be a thankless job, and you may not see the fruition of what you are advocating for many years. But then it doesn't mean that it's zero gains at the end of the day, because then you're able to raise the awareness of the constituents, you're able to reach out to the community, you're able to talk sense to many of the people in government on why this is well worth it. You may not have the main issue of enacting something into a bill that easily. But then, the efforts did not go to waste.
So can you give an example of where, like, you were basically advocating for a long time, or advising the government, or or providing some kind of input to migrants, but it took a long time, but then eventually, it came to fruition. Do you have any example that comes to mind?
National legislation, it's interesting, for example, that we had the OWA Charter, the OWA Charter was enacted in 2016. As early as 2008, we had legislators visiting the office, like the office of Congressman Gatchalian. The staff would visit us and would ask us what would be the urgent legislative agenda for the migrant sector. And at that time, we were struggling with OWA on the policies and the programs, and this is governed only by these omnibus policies that we have a lot of questions about. This was this was promulgated by the OWA board in 2003. So we're saying if only there is a charter for OWA, legislative charter, then maybe things would be a little bit better, and then of course we can really have claim on the welfare fund at OWA. And so we told the legislators, yeah, probably we wanted a legislative charter for OWA. So that was 2008. And then it came to fruition. It was enacted in 2016.
Yeah.
So that was like many years later. Yeah. So that's one. And now OWA and the value added of that OWA charter was the fact that from 2016 onwards, the salaries and operations budget of OWA will be covered by the government budget. Because for the longest time, since OWA's existence, all its expenses are charged to the welfare fund of OWA, which came from the contribution of the migrants.
Yeah.
So that's good. And of course, plus the fact that in several provisions, there is assertion that whatever happens, the OWA funds are private funds and cannot be reverted to the government coffers for anything, and not in any circumstances. So that's also good to protect the welfare fund. So that's one. The other one, of course, is the overseas absentee voting. So and this is very interesting because this is already provided for in the Constitution that if you're Filipino of 18 years at least, and a resident, you have to be in the Philippines to be able to vote. So there is a section there that says, okay, for Filipinos abroad, we will leave it to Congress to enact an enabling legislation. And that constitution was 1987. But then, when was the law on overseas voting enacted? 2003.
Right.
So that was like 16 years,
Wow,
16 full years. And it was good. I think at that time, it was in a bit like we sort of like really put pressure on Congress because we were looking at 2004 as the first presidential elections where we hope the overseas Filipinos can participate. Yeah, so since then, Filipinos overseas could participate in the elections without having to come back to the Philippines. Of course, and not that many registered and voted, but still, hundreds, 300,000 and more. Now it's more than 1 million being able to regain their right to vote is, I think, something that is worth the effort. Although there was a time that some legislators or one legislator was even thinking that we can only do this, let's enact this, but only for one-time exercise. Like, what are you talking about? So I mean, that's an example of like whatever rights we have as Filipinos should be enjoyed as well by our compatriots overseas. They're being abroad, they're being away from the country should not be a reason for them to be disenfranchised.
Definitely.
Yeah. Of course, we still have to work. It's quite limited. The right to vote is still very limited to national positions. So we have to work further so that it will really be like for all positions. So of course, COMELEC is saying it's going to be an administrative nightmare.
Yeah.
But I think somehow, if you are giving the right to vote, then you should give it, 100%. Yeah.
That makes sense. I mean, I'm wondering, to zoom out a little bit, just from an historical perspective, like how did, the issue of migration evolve maybe in the Philippines? I mean, like, was it always the same kind of people that migrated for the same kind of work, or has that changed? And also, what's the dynamics that are going on?
Well, of course, it's not like I'm as old as the
Sure,
contemporary
sure,
history
sure,
of labor
sure.
migration. But from the acceptable timelines, we are saying there has been some change, like shifting
Right.
and all that. Like we used to have like the four waves, the
Yeah.
so-called four waves under the contemporary. So we have the first wave that was like beginning with was not, I will not go back as old as the galleon trade. No, but I think
We have
the
enough time here. Don't worry about it.
no, but of course they can argue.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people can argue that we have always been a mobile population, plus the fact that we are an archipelago. So to go from one island to another, you have to travel. You have to cross the seas or whatever. So anyway, for these four waves, so-called four waves of migration, the first batch, the first wave would be like the 1906. This was the first time that there were like 15 Ilocanos. Ilocanos are from up north in Ilocos Norte. They were recruited to work in the plantations in Hawaii. So they were all men. Yeah, and that was the reason, for example, like many years later when Marcos fled, he went to Hawaii because there is a very huge community of Ilocanos in Hawaii, which
Right.
was started by the first wave in 1906.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so that was like the first wave. Then the second wave would be the professionals, like the professionals mostly going to Europe and North America. And at that time, of course, we were still a colony of America, so visa requirements were relaxed and all that. So many people, they were going there on the basis of the colonial ties, but at the same time for family reunification, on the basis of family reunification. So giving opportunity for families to be together in the U.S. And then they started also to go to Europe. The professionals, the first, maybe the first generation, the Filipinos in Germany are mostly professionals in the health sector as well and all that. And then we have the third wave would be the feminization of migration. Yeah. So this would be like in the 1970s. First, like the shift in the destination. So from U.S. and Europe, now the main destination was Asia, the Gulf in particular, because of course they have a lot of the petrodollars, but then it was all desert.
So that started in the 70s, roughly?
They started in the 70s. It was the time already of the President Marcos, when we already have the labor code in place, 1974. So people didn't have jobs, people were restless, there was martial law, and there was the Gulf area, the Middle East, in need of workers to work on the infrastructures, the hotels and all these other buildings that they have that they will put in place. So they were mostly men and going to the Gulf states, engineers, construction workers. And at that time, our workers were not paying anything. Just for the record, they were not paying anything. The costs were borne by the employers. Yeah. So, and then next wave would be the shift. Not necessarily the shift. The Gulf will still be a major destination, but then you have these other Asian countries, Southeast Asia and East Asia, particularly Japan. So this is where we started to have more women migrating. So after the first wave of doing the infrastructure and the hotels and everything, they need both men and women, young men and women to be at the reception of the hotel, to do the catering, and somehow there is shift to feminization. And of course, particularly in the other parts of Asia, like Japan, that paved the way for the entertainers, who were again also mostly women. So we reached the peak of the so-called feminization. Feminization in the sense that we started to have more women outpacing the men, migrating to other countries as migrant workers. In the 19s, and I think in 2004, we reached like the peak of proportion, like 74% of
Wow.
our annual deployment at the time was women.
That's
Yeah,
the
yeah.
same today?
No, so that was in 2004. So we started to have more women migrating, particularly in Asia, East Asia, Southeast Asia, and also in the Gulf. It's a mix of men and women. But then later on, apart from we Gulf War, the war in Lebanon took place, 2006, and then our government was shocked by the fact that we have women workers in Lebanon agreeing with only $50 salary a month, a lot of undocumented, and so they crafted a new policy, and specifically for women migrants, and particularly for women domestic workers. So this is like the household reform package, and so there was a shift in the for women, more women migrating. So that's why feminization. But the other factor why it's called feminization was because they were concentrated in gender stereotypically women's jobs, i.e., domestic workers. Yeah, so we have also women in other sectors, in the nursing profession, maybe in the sales, in the hospitality, but overwhelmingly, many, even if they are professionals and they have completed their studies, ended up as domestic workers.
Wow.
Because the bulk of the job orders, as they are called, are for domestic workers. So even if they don't want to be domestic workers, we have a lot of teachers. But then they were not unemployed because for like at least in the data of the PSA, our labor, the women's workers labor participation in the Philippines has plateaued to 50%. So what do you do with the other 50%?
Right.
So, and times are not like happy times, struggling with the crisis and everything. So, but then, yeah, so it's a combination of like the women still relegated to the traditional role of taking care of the children and doing the housework unpaid. And then you have all those other women that, okay, this is not working, that only the man will work. So, and there you have a lot of these job orders for women, demand for care workers and women for that matter. So they made, but then of course over the years they realized that we have a lot of these abuses happening as well, disproportionately affecting our women. So you have feminization of migration, numbers and concentration in domestic, but then very, very shockingly as well, feminization of violence, it seems. Like violations happening against our migrant workers are disproportionately affecting our women. 70% of distress, 90% of traffic, big numbers, from the government figures as well.
So there is like a big gender issue also.
It is, yeah, it is. It is. First, of course, migration is gendered, but yeah, just looking at the data of reported violence, gender-based, unpaid wages, repatriation requests, it's overwhelmingly women.
Right.
So that led to government crafting a new set of policies specifically for women. And for the first year, only for the first year, interestingly, so they, POEA, the agency in charge of recruitment regulation deployment, they said no domestic worker will be deployed unless recruiters and employers agree to the household service workers policy. No placement fee, minimum salary of $400. They should have access to communication. Their passport shouldn't be confiscated, etc.
So that's after 2006, actually, right?
2006. So the implementation will be 2007. So if you check the POEA data of deployment for 2007, 2008, the number of women went down,
Right.
but not very drastically, but only like maybe 2%. So men were up again, as in terms of the numbers. But then, if you will monitor 2009 onwards, the numbers for women migrants again continue to increase. So now it's like the latest was like 55 point something women. In the previous year it was 53.
Right.
So it's on the rise again. Yeah. But then our issue is, of course, not that we have more women migrating independently as workers, but our issue is the feminization of violence against our women migrants. When we should be expecting that because we have all these policies already in place, that we should expect that things will be better for them. But how come not?
So it's not actually. So what you're saying is that those laws didn't really change the situation on the ground. Is that still that people? I mean, this is quite shocking. No, $50 a month, and getting their passports confiscated. That sounds like modern slavery. Like,
exactly.
So is that still happening today?
Oh yeah, but because like 2018, the world and us in particular were shocked when a Filipino domestic worker was found in the freezer. For almost a year, she was there in the freezer. And then that led to the government declaring a deployment ban, which to us, of course, we grieve with the family and there should be justice for the domestic worker, for Joanna. But then at the same time, we were critical, we were cautioning government that maybe deployment ban is not the answer to this. This was 2018. Then they lifted it towards the end of last year. We were able to forge a memorandum of agreement with Kuwait on how we can have a sharing of the responsibility to protect the migrant domestic workers. But 2019, we were in the same situation when another domestic worker was brutally murdered, and apparently she was also raped before she was killed. And again, the immediate response of the government is deployment ban. So we are saying that there should be justice, of course, there should be investigation, and there is a process to do that. But we are cautioning again government, and I registered it when we had our committee hearing in the House last Tuesday, that we do not think that the deployment ban is the answer to this, because we were just in that same situation 2018, and we are doing the same thing unilaterally, making the decision when in fact we already have so many policies in place where we can go to the negotiating table, and discuss this with the Kuwaiti partners, for example, with the Kuwaiti government. We have a memorandum, we have a bilateral agreement. Why are we sorting to unilateral? Of course, when you say unilateral, you're actually making, so of course, a political statement. And of course, deployment ban is a prerogative of government. But then we are saying that when you do that, now, when you have all these mechanisms in place, it doesn't look well, because then you're saying to the world unilaterally, oh, Kuwait is a bad country to go to. That's why we are stopping the deployment. But we already have more than 200,000 workers there. So isn't that too late to say that? So I mean, what's happened to the processes? What has happened to the policies? Who is not doing the who is not responsible? Who is not doing the role to protect? Because these things, when the worker already sent SOS, red flags to the recruiter, what did they do? So there are policies in place from the time they left their villages, their communities, to go to Manila to do all these preparations, and then to go take the plane, arrive at the destination. We even have a mandatory post-arrival orientation seminar. It's still a challenge to domestic workers because of their limited mobility. But then we have all those already in place. So why will you resort to deployment ban each time there is a tragedy? Of course, the tragedy is not acceptable, but maybe we should think broadly of the situation and find out, where is the mechanism and where did it fail?
Right.
Yeah.
So, but generally speaking, I mean, is it accurate to say that the domestic workers are the most vulnerable?
Yeah. And I think that at this point in time, particularly because our domestic workers are also in Asia, concentrated in Asia. A lot are in the Gulf, for sure. And we can see this trend in the many years still to come because of the aging, the demographics and all that. They would need a lot of care workers for the aging population. But this is also the case for East Asia and Southeast Asia, where they will also require caregivers. So there's a little bit of shift. There was a study conducted, particularly in the Middle East, where there might be a shift in terms of demand from domestic to caregiver. Right? Rather than just domestic functioning as caregiver, there is more interest to shift from caregiver because of you need some training to administer medicines and all that. But I mean, so the concentration is just in Asia. So you can there are forums now of countries of origin, as there are forums for countries of origin and destination. And I don't know why we should be actively engaging and joining the members of like the Colombo Process. This is the forum for countries of origin. And then you have the Abu Dhabi Dialogue, which was an initiative of the UAE government, as a forum for exchanges, non-binding as they are. I think these are governmental forums where you can put these on the table, that if you need us, then you have to play your role as well.
Yeah. No, makes sense. I mean, okay, so there's many issues definitely, and in between, like what the government is trying to do, and what's, especially also regarding the laws, what's there on paper and the reality on the ground. There's always a big discrepancy, I guess, and you try to kind of point out to the to the things that are also practicable, the things that like what you mentioned about the ban, that this might not be the best the best card to play. Also think, but then on the other hand, from what I understand, other countries are even worse, doing worse than compared to the Philippines, right? So what about other countries of origin? What's your experience there? How do they compare to the Philippines?
But that is precisely why we think it's not comforting, of course, to know that we're not the worst.
Yeah.
Because in fact, with all of these things happening to our workers, particularly to our migrant workers, we are even touted internationally as a model for protection of migrant workers. So you can imagine the worst for the other countries of origin. And probably for those countries, they can definitely, maybe a deployment ban would be a more effective way to guarantee protection for them. But then that said, precisely I think you need to engage with other countries of origin, that this doesn't work like us only vis-a-vis the country of destination. And that's why, if only they will take seriously the Colombo Process, for example, as a forum where they can exchange ideas and best and worst experiences in dealing with a particular country of destination for a particular type of migrant worker. For example, domestic workers. Who are deploying domestic workers? Philippines, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, they started to deploy as well. So the common thing is they're all very vulnerable to abuse. For example, vis-a-vis the Gulf states, vis-a-vis Singapore and Malaysia and all these other countries. So why can't they come together and sort of like, this is affecting us all, so can we do this, collectively? We try that. We reach out, literally, NGOs reaching out to the counterparts, like countries of origin. And what did they tell us? But you have to understand this from the economy of from the numbers that we are deploying. So they said, how many do we deploy for Sri Lanka? We only deploy, say, 50. How many do you deploy from Philippines? 250. So at the end of the day, it becomes like, if Philippines will back out, we will fill in the vacancy.
So
race to the bottom.
It's a competition issue.
It is a competition, but race to the bottom.
Right.
So that's the problem. So and that's why we have to also engage into bilaterals. Because, of course, the better way is multilateral, semi-multilateral. But then these other countries are just looking at the opportunity to send in their people.
Right.
That's very sad.
That's true.
That's the situation.
And there's no voices in those countries that kind of see that there is an issue
No,
with
we
that?
have a lot of civil society partners in those countries, but yeah, that's the problem. I mean, like especially like in South Asia, like Nepal, they have limited the mobility of women. Sri Lanka also, they have limited the mobility of women. But then I think because of the situation, the economic situation, they are beginning to be more open to having an increase in the deployment of women. But then, yeah, that's how, at least at the time when we were negotiating, that we should make use of the Colombo process, strengthen your commonalities. What are your common issues in vis-a-vis domestic workers? But no, we were, what they told us, oh, you go ahead. You make the breakthrough and then we'll follow suit.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it doesn't work that
doesn't
way.
work that
It
way, yeah.
weakens your negotiations.
So the Colombo process, can you just explain that real quick again?
Yeah,
the-
Colombo Process is an initiative of countries of origin of migrants.
Right.
So it's called Colombo because I guess the first meeting happened in Colombo in Sri Lanka. So the idea is this is a forum for us, share our ideas, exchange, let's have an exchange of information on what are our issues, common issues as countries of origin, for example, vis-a-vis the Gulf. Because Philippines, it's not only Philippines, but they also deploy a big number to the Gulf states. So that should have been a good forum to strengthen their agenda vis-a-vis the countries of destination. But then, yeah, they're not making use of it as much as we wanted them to. But then and then later on there was this other initiative, which is called the Abu Dhabi Dialogue. So again, it's Abu Dhabi because the first meeting took place in Abu Dhabi in the UAE. And this time, it was an initiative of the Gulf states, principally led by the UAE Ministry of Labor. That, okay, you have the Colombo process for origin, then let's have the Abu Dhabi as destination. But then all the member states of the Colombo process are also on board in the Abu Dhabi Dialogue.
Okay.
So, but then again, we're not seeing much in terms of the origin countries making use of these spaces.
Okay, so you have those. Okay, so you have those processes in place, but so there is a lack
And then you
of-
have the ASEAN, for
Yeah,
example,
okay.
and then in the South Asia you have the SARC, and then of course finally there was a breakthrough at the international with the Global Compact.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, but yeah.
And what's and there may be another side to the same coin. What's happening in the countries of destination? Is there any associations of migrant workers as well? Is there any exchange between different countries? I mean, where migrant workers are from? I mean, different nationalities, or how is that actually taking place there?
Well, of course, like officially, many countries in the Gulf, migrant workers cannot engage in trade union activities. This is an exclusive right of their local workers.
Right.
But in Qatar, for example, in their labor law, they allow for joint committees, as a venue for non-Qatari migrant workers. Yeah, so they are still in the process of how to implement this, but this is like their union translation for migrant workers. But that said, we have a lot of organizations of migrants and support groups as well in the Gulf, and in mainland Asia, we like CMA is a member of Migrant Forum in Asia, which has member organizations advocating for the rights of migrants both in the origin and destination countries in 16 countries in Asia. And then in the Gulf, there is also a regional organization, CCRM, but I forgot the meaning. But this is a cross-border. Right. So we've been in dialogue with CCRM. So MFA and CCRM doing a lot of cross-border or cross-regional dialogues on the issues of our migrants going to their destination countries. So, and these groups from Lebanon, Jordan, to the Middle East, to the Gulf states, are in direct contact with the policymakers as well. in their own way, they're able to have dialogues from time to time with their concerned agencies, so mainly in the executive, but also with our embassies and consulates.
Right.
Yeah, so, and then we try to come together for cross-regional dialogues. So recently, like the last one in December, we discussed about how we can make use of the GCM in furthering our advocacies, particularly for the Gulf states. And of course, we also have to address the concerns on the GCM from the point of view of the countries of origin.
Right.
So there are organizations, and many thanks as well to technology.
Yeah,
You do not
exactly.
have to be physically present and have to meet face to face. You can do a lot of exchanges online.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so so things are moving forward, and of course there's a lot of, very interestingly I should say, that there have been positive developments in the Gulf. Maybe things are taking very slowly to unfold, but for example, when the ILO deliberated on ILO Convention 189 on decent work for domestic workers. 2010, the sense of the Gulf states was only to have a recommendation. By 2011, they were gearing for a convention. And during the deliberation in 2011 in Geneva, they made a lot of interventions on the floor on behalf of the Gulf states to make sure that the convention provisions are robust in terms of protection. Of course, it's another issue, as they would say 1 year later, the ratification. So, but the convention itself is, but it sets the standards.
Yeah.
And I think we recognize that contribution from them. So we even have picture taken just to record that moment. So that's one positive development. Even in the crafting of the Global Compact, the UAE, for one, was quite active in making interventions. Of course, because of the FIFA 2022,
Yeah, exactly.
Qatar is making very good reforms, doing away with the kafala, initially covering only those migrant workers as defined or included in their labor laws. But now it's for everybody,
Okay.
including domestic workers.
Right.
So there are movements there. But at the same time, we take note as well, for example, in the case of the Philippines, that the last few years we saw a dip or a decrease, significant decrease in our deployment to the Gulf. And that was because of the crisis, but
Yeah.
also because of the seeming that they are more resolved now, seriously, to implement the nationalization program. So in Saudi, you call it the Saudization, Emiratisation in the UAE, where, because their young people are restless. So this was from 2010, when you have these riots happening
Right.
in Bahrain, even in Saudi. So their young people are restless and demanding jobs as well, but not the low paid.
Yeah,
So
sure.
what's happening now, you will hear a lot of stories of our engineers and professionals that, how long will you be working as a migrant? Oh, until I train the one who will replace me. So there is non-deployment, about 8 to 10%, decrease in the deployment of our workers to the Gulf states. So not because things are getting better in the country, in the Philippines, but because of this Saudization and nationalization programs in the Gulf states, plus the economic problems, where many of them were forced to cut off the subsidies to private companies and other things. So life is difficult for us, but also for them.
Yeah,
And so this was, so it resulted to non-deployment of our people officially. I should add officially, because since things are not really improving in the country, it is most likely that many of our prospective migrant workers would take the back door, or has taken the back door,
Okay.
to go to other countries, despite the economic difficulties in those destinations.
So do you think that in the mid to long term, the area of destination will change. I mean, I mean, the Gulf in particular, is that going to be replaced by a different area in like, let's say, 10 years or something? Just because the labor market is changing, but also because it's such an unstable, region. So, do you think this is going to change, or?
Maybe not in the immediate, because as I said, like there was this study commissioned by the UAE government on the future of domestic workers, for example, in the Gulf, just in the Gulf, and the conclusion was there will be a steady demand for caregivers. So that's why the shift also from domestic workers to caregivers to the Gulf states. But yes, in terms of destination of Filipinos, I've been hearing and seeing a lot of road shows. They are called by recruiters. They've been going to other destinations. New Zealand is relatively new. We just set up or opened our Polo labor office in New Zealand because they expect a lot of workers to go there because of the reconstruction as well and the rebuilding because of the earthquakes and the like. And then they've been visiting Europe because I think they are anticipating that there will be a decrease. Non-deployment still would be like not as many as we used to deploy in the in the Gulf states. So they are exploring possibilities with some of the European destinations.
Yeah, in Germany, for example, I know that nurses is a big topic, right?
Yeah.
And GIZ, for example, they have a program, right? That's specifically.
That's the
catered
triple
to-
win.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So what about this type of project? I mean, is that useful, from your point of
Well, this is like particularly the triple win is for Germany. It's called triple win because Germany wins. Because
Everybody wins.
Everybody wins. Philippines, but they said the migrant workers.
Well, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. But the thing is, we are not seeing as many in terms of like the numbers. We thought there would be a lot in terms of deployment. But apparently, especially on the first few years of its implementation, it was not happening. So I don't really know. Even the German side was wondering about it. Philippines, I don't know. But they're saying that, they've been trying to iron out whatever it is. But I don't know. But yeah, so that's what. But I wouldn't think it's in the same scale as the deployment of our nurses, for example, in the Middle East.
Right.
So it will still be in a limited, and limited is relative, relative to the numbers we are deploying in other destinations. Because maybe in the case of Europe, that can be a possible new market, because of course when we were discussing the waves of migration, we have had already the deployment to Europe, but on very small numbers.
Right.
But now it's going to be opening up for migration, for migrant, but definitely quite skilled. They would require a lot of skilled workers. The door is closed for domestic workers. But then again, it cannot probably replace the volume, the big numbers that we deploy within Asia. So that's the thing. And of course, this early, we have had cases already of trafficking cases in Europe, like truck drivers being recruited from another country and then being deployed to another country so they can skirt this more stringent requirement in Europe. So these are trafficking cases, and all the more that we should be on the lookout for these, since a lot of people would be immediately tempted to take the Europe destination, seriously. And already there have been a lot of victims of illegal recruitment and trafficking.
Okay, I see. Well, like looking toward the future, I mean, in your work in particular. So if you, let's say in the next 5 to 10 years, what are like the main kind of objectives that you have? What would you like to see? I mean, like you already said, like a lot of the work you can't see immediate concrete effects maybe, but then some years later you discover that what you did was actually not in vain, but like really helped to get some change on underway. But what are what's your main focal point at this point? What's the main challenges?
Well, main challenges, I think, one, as far as the Philippines is concerned, is in relation to reintegration. Economic, of course, economic and psychosocial reintegration, but more economic reintegration, where this is the way to cut, so to speak, the vicious cycle of migration. Because we believe that a lot of our migrant workers will not take the migration option if they have viable options in the country. So the only way that you can make them stay here is if you are offering them sustainable, viable reintegration programs. But then that cannot happen when you are not overhauling your entire economic development program. Cannot be in a vacuum that only the returning migrants will be able to have these programs for reintegration. Right. It has to be the bigger picture that you need to address. And that's one big challenge that has been haunting this government for like many years, and that's why they say, oh, this migration thing will only be temporary. But it will only be temporary when you really have the options here for decent jobs. But unless you have it, then the migration will continue. So reintegration is quite a big challenge. Of course, the government will always say, oh, but they are successful reintegration. But that's not thanks to government. What we need to see is government providing the opportunities, maybe a blueprint of how they imagine people coming back and not going for work abroad anymore. That's something that we still have yet to see. And that has been like a challenge for many years. But at the same time, the trend is moving across borders. People will move, so it's not like you want them to stay here. No, the idea is you have the options here, but for sure, some of them, hopefully not most of them, but some of them will cross borders and live and work in other places. And what do we want them to see happening in those other places? That those countries should value the contribution not only to their economies, but to the social development of their society as a whole, that they should not be looked upon as threat to security as they used to have in the old days, that they are just there, to make them prosperous as they want to provide for their families here. So, and we have been discussing that at the international community, changing the narratives of migration, making it more positive, and not only one where people from the Philippines are seen as desperate for jobs, that they will accept anything for $50 or so. No, but there should be more value to the contribution of migrant workers, economic, but also in other ways, for Philippines and for the destination countries that they go to, So
if you had one message or one central message that you would like the Philippine government to hear, what would that be then? I mean, like reintegration, you mentioned that already. I mean, what is but maybe something else?
Maybe you cannot stop migration, but for the Philippine government, we already have a lot of protection mechanisms. Take stock of what we have, implement them properly, provide resources to these efforts. Because as I related to you, it took many years. It takes many years for legislation to happen. And the legislation is necessary when you already have a big number of population affected by this issue. But unfortunately, they forget. So that's why you have to do this remembering of what you already have in place, so you do not reinvent the wheel. But at the same time, I think the message is also, it should go to our migrant workers as well, that at the end of the day, they have to take responsibility for themselves. You don't go for work purposes when you do not have the proper visa. Don't go there as a tourist. They become vulnerable to all these illegal recruiters and unscrupulous elements and traffickers.
So yeah, I was going to ask you the same. So you answered it already. Same question for prospective migrant workers, right? So go
Yeah.
through the official channels, I guess. Don't
Go
make
to
yourself vulnerable
Yeah.
to being exploited, right?
Exactly. So yeah, and unfortunately and very sadly, you're still seeing a lot of this, like in the UAE with all these visit visas, and they are being taken advantage of.
Right.
They pay a lot of money so they can get this 3 month tourist visa or visit visa, and then do they hope? Of course, they hope to get a good employer and all that, but then. There's no guarantee. Even those who go through the proper channels, they end up with bad employers. So all the more if you do not go through the regular channels. So in those situations, you really need to emphasize also the responsibility of the persons, the individual migrants, prospective migrants also. Yeah. You cannot be just the government all the time. It has to be also like uh, ourselves taking responsibility for what happens
makes
to
a lot of
us.
sense. And I think, from what I understand, a lot of your work is also trying to, do some capacity building, trying to provide, migrant organizations, but also some migrants themselves with like legal advice and those kind of, legal skills rather. So that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think it's great work that you're doing. This year, what is how's it going to look like for you?
Okay, for 2020, it will be another very busy year as we did in 2019. A lot of the work on the ground, which we like and enjoy a lot, like going to the communities and where the migrants come from, engaging with the local government. We find it quite rewarding and worthwhile to engage them, that, emphasizing to them that you have a place in the sun when it comes to migrant workers and what role you have, not only like the turf of the national government agency. So we will be doing a lot of capacity building still. We have not covered the entire 17 or 18 regions of the Philippines. We'll be assisting them in setting up their migrant help desk so that it's functional not only in paper. And engaging the local government, the mayors, the governors. For this year, we will be focusing a lot of these efforts in Mindanao. We were very happily surprised, and in our partners meeting in early February, like a whole team of the officers of the Dinagat Island, the Dinagat province, attended the meeting headed by their chief of staff. So, oh my God, immediately there was a commitment on their side to really make them also like of service to their migrant constituents, because they have like 4% of their population. Then you multiply it with their family members and all that. So it's a lot of, So very busy, but at the same time, we'll be busy also at the legislative. As you may know, there's a spending proposal to put everything that concerns overseas Filipinos and migrant workers under one department. So this department is at the House. They consolidated like 30 plus bills into one now, and it's called Department of Filipinos Overseas and Overseas Employment. They have yet to deliberate in the Senate. But so there are a lot of issues where we should be concerned about in the proposal. So we will be engaging the legislative in that respect as we continue to engage with the executive, but also at the local or the subnational and the migrant communities at the same time.
Yeah, it sounds like you're going to be busy.
Very busy, very tiring, but rewarding, I would say.
No, and you're very energetic and you do great work, and everybody that I know is appreciating what you're doing. So that's really fantastic. Ellen, it was great to have you here on the show. Thank you very much. The time passes so quickly. Thank you very much, and we'll do this again sometime.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Time passed so quickly. Oh my God.
Yeah, right.
Sorry, I was. Maybe I look ridiculous holding the mic like this.